All right, hopefully I resumed the recording. So for those of us who knew we weren't going to have to be here, or, we come to class when we feel like coming to class. This one you can really come to class when you feel like coming to class because I'll record it and I'll put it up on Canvas. So, it's 10 past, I'll get started. Just want to go through a few things. There will be a test on Thursday. There will be a proctor. So somebody will come in and drop off the test, and you take the test and bring your own paper again to write the essay. And you put them all together, staple them back up, and give me back the test questions to staple them to your answers. So I have them all in one neat little packet with a staple on it, which means that I got to remind somebody, of course, next door to bring a stapler because I won't be there. But they have staplers, Chaminade, we're not that poor. We can buy a stapler or two every so often. Of course, now that I'm being recorded, and actually I'm recording myself, so I'm going to do this to myself. And if you went down the hill, you see some offices that they got some great stuff, man. They got stuff that we don't even get to look at. They're afraid that if we look at them, we might corrupt them. So they buy all these new pieces of equipment. That new data science program has got some really, really neat stuff. Stuff that I can't even get a new computer. So how am I going to get any of that stuff? So yesterday I figured out that if I had the old setup, the one that Dan K10, I would have been able to see 20 people all at the same time if they chose to turn their cameras on, or if I told them they had to turn their cameras on. Anyway, all right, so test on Thursday. There's the 3 chapters on contracts. So just a few things that I want to go through today to kind of like review a little bit. Objective theory of contracts. So again, it's what you write down and what you say. Never mind what you thought. The kind of thing like, well, I thought if I spent that much money, at least you'd polish the car before you gave it to me or delivered it to me. Well, if you didn't put down detail in the car, you don't get detail in the car because it's objective, not subjective. Same kind of thing with, well, I thought you knew the price was too high and you were going to discount it by 10%. Or I thought you understood that everybody gets a 10% discount. Well, if it's not written or stated, then it's not in the contract, right? So always be aware of that. The 4 elements: agreement, consideration, capacity, legality. And then the voluntary assent, and then sometimes it's got to be in writing, which is also known as the statute of frauds. So now here, different kinds of contracts. These are all inside the textbook. Bilateral is a promise for a promise. Unilateral is a promise for an act. I don't want you to promise that you're going to find my dog. I want you to find my dog and bring him back. And then you will have accepted the contract. Formal, forms, maybe even a wax seal that gets imprinted on the bottom of the contract, or a notary kind of seal that gets imprinted into the paper. Informal, no special form or creation. So again, you know that many oral contracts are legitimate. The only problem, of course, is the proof, and that's why some of them have to be in writing. Express, you have words that form it. Implied, we talked about that with the bento in the pod. The person there, they kind of trust that you're going to pay them. You don't want to stand in the line because you got the class. So you grab the bento, you hold it up in front of them, and you go like, hey, I'm going to take this. And they nod their head like, okay. And then they were expecting to be paid for it. You knew that it cost money. So when you take it with you to have it for your lunch, then you've accepted the contract. No words need to be spoken, just a lot of actions, and it implies that a contract was in fact created. So valid contract, enforceable has all of the elements and no defenses that can be used against it. Avoidable is when one party has the opportunity to get out of it, like if somebody threatened them or if it wasn't in writing when it was supposed to be. Unenforceable is something that's just wrong and cannot be enforced. Like, let's say, like you make a contract without legality, that it's illegal to kill somebody, and you make one of those TV contracts to kill someone. That's an unenforceable, a void contract. And then void contracts mean there was never a contract at all from the very get-go. Quasi contracts, this is when something is done to avoid unjust enrichment. So, the implied contract, use that as a backdrop. Remember, one of the elements of the implied in fact contract was that the recipient had the opportunity to deny the service, but did not and benefited from it anyway. So here, what if you had the opportunity to deny the service? Well, you don't take it. But what if you were unconscious, like the paramedics come and you've been rendered unconscious? You got the results of your tests that both will be coming back about the same time, and you're so freaked out by the results that you run out of the class, except you forget to open a door. You run right into the door and knock yourself out. Somebody, as after all the stories you've heard me tell you about the bad students I've had in the past, that I had that mini stroke, I blacked out, passed out, went down on the table, and nobody called 911. That's why I say I hate my students from now on. They just don't care. Anyway, you're going to not be like that. So you're going to see your friend lying on the floor unconscious. You're going to call 911. Paramedics are going to come to help them. They are unconscious, so they don't have the ability to say no. And they receive the service, and then afterwards they say, well, I don't want to pay for it because, even though, it's not an implied in fact contract, I didn't sign anything to make it an express contract. So must be I don't have to pay. Well, the law says, well, we're gonna have a quasi contract. This is a contract in fairness. It's what you see there, an equitable remedy to prevent you from being unjustly enriched, because the paramedics should be paid for their services. And just because you're unconscious, unless you had a DNR on you, you end up having to pay for the services that were rendered. Question then becomes, how much do you pay? And the answer is, you see there, quantum merit, to the extent that it is warranted, to the extent of the merit or the extent of the services rendered. So if there's a standard price list, then that's going to be what you're going to be charged. If there's a reasonable price, then that's what you're going to be charged. It's not going to be, well, we saved your life, so we're going to charge you $1 million. Well, that would not be what would be warranted or merited. So you're not going to have to pay that much. Offer. Now, this is something, because again, this is part of the agreement. The agreement has two parts. The agreement has the offer and the acceptance. So here, when you take a look at the offer, notice there are three elements. Now remember the whole big thing about elements, right? This is what applies in the application section of your answer. You need to answer again the question in the IRAC form, IRAC, the issue, the rule of law, the application, and then finally the conclusion. In the application, you need to break down all of the elements. So if it was an offer, did Wayne make an offer when he told Branson, orangutan for sale, 50 grand, you like buy? Now, we're going to say that there was an offer, because Branson's going to say, no, there wasn't. I was forced into it. I couldn't have been held accountable for this. So now in the application section, you have to look at it. Serious intention. Did it seem like it was serious? Or was this just a joke? Or was it just an invitation to negotiate? What were the definiteness of the terms? 50 grand for the orangutan. Doesn't seem to be any arbitrariness or any lack of definitiveness in that particular offer. And then communication from the offeror to the offeree. Wayne did in fact ask Branson if he wanted to buy the orangutan. Now remember, we haven't gotten to the defenses yet. We're just looking to see whether or not there's an offer. So if the question were on the offer, your application would have to include an explanation as to whether or not the offer was serious, whether or not there was definite and certain terms, and whether or not there was a communication from the offeror to the offeree. Now, if all three are not present, we don't have an offer. So if you're trying to say that there's no offer, just negate one. If you're trying to say that there is an offer, then you have to validate all three. I know I'm talking pretty fast because I want to get through this as quickly as I possibly can. So if you have any questions, please don't be shy. Don't hesitate to ask. Termination of the offer. People can say, "Hey, I give up. You didn't accept in time, so no more offer." You can have a revocation, a rejection, or a counteroffer. Sometimes it happens by operation of law. Someone makes an offer to you, and then before you get to accept it, they die. The offer dies. Someone makes an offer to you, before you get to accept it, the substance of the contract, the material that you're negotiating, making a contract for, is destroyed. Then that terminates the offer by operation of law as well. Sometimes there are irrevocable offers. Irrevocable offers are offers that cannot be revoked. You just got to wait until the person says yes or no. Acceptance, on the other hand, so if we're talking about agreement, you'd have to talk about the offer and the three elements, and then you have to talk about the acceptance. And in the acceptance, again, in the application section, you would have to determine whether or not it was a voluntary act that the offeree made that shows that they were in assent or in agreement to the terms of the offer. And it has to be unequivocal, which means no exception, no further explanation. It's what we call the mirror image rule. You have to accept it exactly as how it was offered. Anything that deviates from that becomes a counter offer and terminates the original offer. So acceptance, silence is generally not good unless you have an affirmative obligation to speak. So if I tell you, here's something, if you like it, keep it. If you don't like it, send it back. Well, if you don't send it back, your silence will then operate as acceptance, right? So here, this is when someone has a duty to speak and they don't. They just keep the benefit. They will be deemed to have accepted the offer, even if they said nothing. There's something called a mailbox rule, and this is something that you don't want to be affected by. It basically says that acceptance is effective when the offeree uses authorized means of acceptance. So if the mail is used, acceptance is effective upon dispatch of a return mail. This does not apply to instantaneous communication. So if you're right there, it doesn't matter. But what this means is that if somebody sends you an offer in the mail, hey bro, orangutan for sale, 50 grand, you like buy. And it doesn't say how the acceptance is to be made. The minute that you accept it, you write a letter back to me and you say yes. And then you put that letter in the mail. At that moment that you put it in the mailbox, it becomes effective as a valid acceptance. It doesn't matter if I know about it or not. I'm now obligated to deliver the product to you. Now, this could be very critical, especially when, let's say, the orangutan offered it for 50 grand. What if you saw something on the news the night before and you're really not sure whether or not that was the orangutan, but it said that this is the last of its kind, and it actually has a collector's value of $1 million. When you said yes to the 50 grand, what did you just do? You bought yourself $1 million orangutan for $50,000. Would you want that acceptance to be valid? Of course you would, because if you did, then you would have made $950,000 on the sale, right? So if I don't deliver the orangutan to you for whatever reason, even if it's 2 years later and you find out I owe you $950,000 in damages, and you know how you figure that out, right? The sales price that you could sell it for is $1 million. You would have bought it for $50,000, which is cost of goods sold. Revenue minus sales revenue minus cost of goods sold equals gross profit. Right? You would have had to spend the $50,000 no matter what, so your profit is not $1 million. It's the million less the cost of goods sold. So your gross profit would be $950,000. There are some exceptions. Acceptance is not properly dispatched, so you mail it to the wrong address. Um, the one area where this becomes really, really critical and could be very critical for all of you is income taxes. Because if you send a letter properly posted, which means you put the stamp on it and enough postage on the envelope, and you send it by April 15th, it is deemed to have already been given to the IRS at that time. So if, however, you mail it to the wrong IRS address or you forget to put the stamp on, then your acceptance is not valid and you have a delinquent tax return, and you know how much trouble that can get you into. But if you have, and you're going to need proof of this, that's why we always send things to the IRS, certified mail, return receipt requested. Then what will happen is that you will have proof of the address that you mailed it to. You'll have the date that the letter or the correspondence was actually sent, and you will be golden from that point in time on. Even if the IRS never receives the return or never receives the envelope, you still have done your legal duty and you will be okay. Sometimes there's a substitute method. You could have things. Let's see, what am I missing? Sorry, I'm checking out the chat. Angel and I are on the phone. Computer isn't working. Oh, gee. Funny how that happens to computers so often. I know, I'm just making fun of you because my computer doesn't work the right way many, many times. You should have seen me trying to set up the Bluetooth for this thing. I called my wife about 3 times at about 3 o'clock in the morning. Yeah, I was up at 6 trying to make sure this thing would work. But I finally got it to work. She was afraid that something terrible had happened to me. And she finally got back in touch with me. And I said, sorry, equivalent of a butt dial. You know, I was just pushing the button to try to get the Bluetooth to hook up. And it just kept hitting call back. And then call back the last number. See, aren't you lucky you don't call your professors on their cell phone? So you could have substitute methods. The FedEx and UPS are virtually the same. Sometimes faxes and emails are considered to be pretty much the same. Unless someone says you must send by FedEx, then you must send by FedEx. Sending by UPS would not be a valid method of acceptance. All right, now again, all I had to do was talk about the computer not working right, and guess what? There we go. There's some things in the text about e-contracts. So many things that we buy on the internet. You know, they have that click to accept thing here. They have those boxes that you check saying you understand the terms, all that kind of stuff. If those things are all checked off and properly done, then you got yourself a valid acceptance. And the company has itself an actual sale, which means if you don't accept it or you don't pay for it, they can sue you. Online offers, you know, provisions have to include return policies, disclaimers, limitation of remedies, you know, privacy policies. By the way, as far as privacy policies are concerned, I'm pretty sure you're aware of the fact that no one in this day and age has a right to privacy. Everybody can find out almost anything about you. And you can imagine if you're Facebook, how much they know about you. Because it's not just the things that you send or that you post, but anybody else who posts something about you, that goes into the database as well. So they can find out stuff, you know, about you and about what's going on without you ever even having a social media account. That's why if you look for me, you'll find a lot of stuff that I have never posted, but somebody else did. And as a result, it comes up when you search for me, and my privacy is just basically thrown out the window at that point. Online offers, same kind of thing. One of the things you want to make sure is you don't know where this product is coming from. So if anything goes wrong, you better set up a forum selection clause, which means where are you going to go to court? Choice of law, same thing. You're buying something that comes from a manufacturer in China. You have to choose which law is going to be effective. Will it be the U.S. law, as you learned it in BU 362 at Chaminade University, or will it be Chinese law that you have never even heard about and couldn't read even if you had it? You just want to make sure that your choice is clear and it has the opportunity to benefit you as much as possible. Click on agreements. We know basically you click the damn thing, you must have bought it, right? Shrink wrap agreements, anything inside the box. Once you open the box, you just kept it. You just bought it. E-signatures, this does not apply to all documents. A lot of us don't even have e-signature capability. Examples, though, even if you did have e-signature capability, court documents, divorce decrees, prenuptials, wills, they do not count. Then we have consideration. You gotta have legally sufficient value. Don't look for money, look for promises. Did somebody promise something that they didn't have to do before the promise, but after the promise, now they must do? Remember, promise or set of promises for the breach of which the law will grant a remedy, or the performance of which the law in some way recognizes a legal duty. So this is the idea of the legally sufficient value. It is the promise. And then you also have to have what's called a bargain for exchange, something for something. Or as one of my favorites, Hannibal Lecter said, quid pro quo, something for something. I give you something, you must give me something in exchange. And that something has to have value, right? So here's the legally sufficient value: a promise, a performance, or forbearance, which means not doing something. The Hammer versus Sidway question is one that I ask on a few occasions, because if you give up these things, drinking, smoking, swearing, and playing cards for money, even though that's good for you, you still gave something up because you may have had the legal right to do that. Right, Marvin? So when you go to Las Vegas, if they tell you, if you don't gamble at all, we'll give you $100. Well, you have the right to gamble as long as you're over 21. Giving up that right to gamble gives you the right to receive the $100. Now, of course, if they tell you that, make sure you tell them, okay, I promise not to gamble in Las Vegas for the first hour after I arrive. And then if they say yes, then you get the $100 and you can gamble anytime after that. Remember, be very specific in the making of your contracts so that you know exactly what it is that you can and cannot do. Bargain for exchange is the basis for the bargain. Why are you doing this? Well, because you want something or you need something. Why are they doing it? Well, same reason. Adequacy of consideration, it doesn't matter. See, that's why when I asked Branson if he wants to buy the orangutan for $50,000, you can look at me and go, you're nuts, but I'm not nuts. And what that means is that if he agreed, the court's not going to say, hey, that orangutan is not worth $50,000, so Branson shouldn't have to pay $50,000. The court will say, he should have just said no. But once he said yes, it doesn't matter whether or not the deal made sense or it was worth it or not. That's why you read everything, you consider everything, you basically try to analyze everything. Otherwise, you're going to find yourself in a world of hurt. There's something about the settlement of claims. Now, we don't always want to go to court. So sometimes they let us settle. An accord and satisfaction is a special kind of settlement. It says the debtor offers to pay a lesser amount than the creditor purports to be owed. A liquidated debt that has been ascertained, fixed, and agreed upon is not subject to this rule. So if you borrow $10,000 from a bank, you got to pay back exactly $10,000 plus interest to the bank. An unliquidated debt, on the other hand, is something where reasonable people would differ as to how much it actually is. So let's say that, as you know, the process of selling my let's say in order to sell it, I need to get it painted. And let's say that the painter and I establish a contract for $10,000. What does a $10,000 paint job look like? Well, reasonable people would differ as to what a $10,000 paint job looks like. So if I were to say, hey, look, bro, you did a pretty shabby job. I don't think this is worth 10 grand, and I don't think I should have to pay 10 grand. I tell you what, I give you $7,500 and let's call it even. If the painter accepts that $7,500, contract is finished. He does not have the right to come after me for the other $25 which he did not receive. But this has to be a good faith dispute. I actually, and others would have to actually say, yeah, this don't look like a $10,000 paint job. It cannot be the kind of situation where, let's say, since Marvin disclosed this, I'm picking on Marvin again. Marvin just comes back from Las Vegas. He lost more than he can afford. He really, really desperately needs money. You owe Marvin money. Marvin comes to collect from you. You know Marvin is desperate for money. You owe Marvin 10 grand, and you tell Marvin, Marvin, you know the job you did was pretty bust up, pretty kapakai, all jam up and not worth it. So I'm only going to pay you $5,000, and we're going to call it a deal. Now remember, if Marvin takes that money, that's it. He doesn't get the other $5,000. If you know that he's desperate for money and you take advantage of that situation to kind of like coerce him into taking less, then that's not good faith. And he can still come after to sue you for the other $5,000 that you did not pay. All right. So remember that. That is something that a lot of these things require good faith in the whole matter of the contract. Oh, Marvin is smiling. Oh, wonderful. All right. So you can have a release, you can have a covenant not to sue. These things can all be put into a contract. Again, they must be in good faith, though. You do this because you know you have superior bargaining power over the other person, or you have information that would make them embarrassed or something. That's not good faith. And whatever you put in will probably not be enforceable. I say probably because you don't know until you go to court. There's something called promissory estoppel. Here is where the plaintiff, that's the person that's suing, the person that got screwed over, they're saying that, you know what, I had a good faith and substantially reasonable reliance on the promise. So let's put it this way. What is reasonable and substantially relying upon promise that you can retain recovery for? Well, you're graduating in business. Let's say someone offers you a job as a manager. And to do that, you got to quit your current job. You got to get ready. You got to move house, maybe even have to buy an airline ticket to move someplace else. You're incurring all of these costs because someone promised you a job as a manager. And you can do that job because with a business degree, you can be a manager. So they renege. They say, no, I was only joking. And you sue them. Well, even though there was no promise made that has consideration, because, you know, promise is just a promise. It's not a contract, right? Notice it says promise. It does not say contract. So just because they did that and they knew you would reasonably rely on this, or it was reasonable for you to rely on this, and that's the jury question, then the plaintiff is going to recover. You're going to get whatever damages you're entitled to, and you might even get the job. However, let's put it into this context. You just graduated in business. Someone offers to pay you $500,000 a year to be the chief of neurosurgery at Queens. Well, that's unreasonable reliance because you have no ability to do that job. So that wasn't reasonable reliance. That wasn't substantial reliance because you knew you could not complete the job as a neurosurgeon. So you could not get that promise Again, it's just a promise. You cannot get that promise enforced. These are the requirements: definite promise, justifiable reliance. Reliance is substantial, means it costs you a lot of money, and justice will only be served by enforcing the promise. Notice, it is justice that will be served, right? This is something interesting. This is not the law. It's in the interest of justice that this rule exists. And there are quite a few instances like this, like we already saw quasi-contract, where people cannot be unjustly enriched. Promissory estoppel is so that people cannot just make promises that they have no intention of keeping just because they know it's not a contract, even though they know that you will reasonably rely. You know, this is like you can't jerk somebody's chain around. That's really what it comes down to. Application, they're going to look for hardship, and they're going to look for real unfair situations that are occurring. All right, so now that's the first part. Second part, as you know, deals with capacity and legality. We know too young, too drunk, too crazy, no contract. All right, so I'm going to fly through these slides in this area. Legality, to be enforceable, it has to be formed for a legal purpose. So if you're under 21 and you make an agreement to cater a party and it includes alcohol, that's illegal. So that contract would not be enforceable because it would be missing the element of legality. Unconscionability, this is something that's so bad, it literally shocks the consciousness of the court. So you look at this and you go like, well, you know, this is like the one-sided bargain where it's a take it or leave it kind of thing. Like, what if Hawaiian Electric were suddenly to tell all of us that we'd have to pay $5,000 a month for electricity and we live in a one-bedroom condominium? You know, that would be unconscionable because your choice would be either no electricity or pay the $5,000. You know, courts would get involved and renegotiate that whole contract. Then they do have the power to do that. Voluntary consent, okay, mistakes. You make a mistake, it sucks to be you, all right? The only kind of mistakes that will negate contracts are when both sides didn't know what they were bargaining for. The classic example is this guy is bargaining over a cow. They both thought the cow was barren and could not bear calves. Comes to find out the cow can have a calf. It is still fertile. What they say is there's a big difference between a barren cow and a fertile cow. Both of them thought it was barren, so neither of them understood what they were bargaining for. They both made a mistake, so therefore the contract is excused. But if one side knew and the other side didn't know, then, well, too bad. Unilateral mistakes, again, that's where one side knows, the other side didn't. Sucks to be you. Some mistakes get overturned, though, because you make a mathematical error that's not gross negligent. In other words, you don't add 1 plus 1 and come up with 5,000. You add 1 plus 1 and your calculator comes up with 5,000. Well, you should have known the difference, but sometimes you add 1 million plus 1 million and you get 2,005,000. Well, that's something went wrong with the machine. So maybe you get out of that one. In the book, it shows these exhibits so you can have a better look at what kinds of mistakes can and cannot be used to get out of a contract. Fraud, okay, this is when you have the intention to trick somebody. This will negate a contract. It's got to be a material fact, something big. It's got to be something that you really wanted to trick the person. The other person has to rely on the misrepresentation, and the innocent party has to receive injury, lose money. Now, if it was, let's say, reasonable reliance on the misrepresentation has got to be reasonable. If I tell you that I have the elixir of life and it'll make you live forever, and you pay me $10,000 and I'll sell you a bottle of it, you're just stupid if you agree to that. You lose your money. That's not misrepresentation because the reliance is so short of reasonable that nobody would say, that that's a good excuse. The phrase "a fool and his or her money are soon parted," that's where that comes from. Lack of voluntary consent can be voidable. So like when I held the gun to Branson's head, he didn't voluntarily agree to that. Notice it had nothing to do with the value of the orangutan or whether or not we were too young, too dumb, or too crazy, right? It was that some force or coercion was used to take advantage of the person who was on the other side of the contract, all right? And then the rest, the writing, things have to be in writing. We talked about that. Um, I'm just gonna go over this real quickly. I think my microphone is about to go dead because what will happen is in the book there'll be a whole chart about what things need to be in writing, and you can look at that again. We talked about the discharge of a contract. That basically means doing what you promised to do. That's the best way to do it. If you don't do it, then there are damages. Damages are computed to put the injured party, the non-breaching party, in a good a position as they would have been had the injury never occurred or had the contract been performed as was promised. So these are the kind of things that uh, should be considered. Discharge of contracts, you got to make sure that you have um, terms and conditions as to what constitutes a valid discharge or completion of the contract. And at that point, nobody has the right to sue anybody because each side did exactly what they agreed to do. Right? There are other things here about conditions. We talked about that when we talked about jumping off the rock in Waimea Bay. And then sometimes things are impossible, like snowing in Waikiki. So we mentioned a lot of these things, and you can just look through the textbook for the balance of them. Punitive damages, I will mention. This is to punish the wrongdoer. They did something really bad, so we want to set an example of them. That's when you get more than what the fraud was worth, more than what the contract was worth. That's when you get extra. Excuse me. Nominal damages, on the other hand, means you're right, but so what? There was really no loss. You proved how smart you are and how well you understood law and how you got the A plus in a class. But who cares? It's not worth anything, so maybe the court will award you $1. There's something called mitigation of damages. Each side has to help the other side out, even if they breached the contract. So mitigation basically means so that you don't have the other person bear that much of a loss. What that means is you actually got to reduce your own damages by helping the other person fix what they did wrong. All right. More things about damages, another chart that you'll see in the book, and that's pretty much close to the end. We talked about equitable recoveries already, about quasi-contract, promissory estoppel. These are things in equity, not in law. This is out of fairness. And this is something that a lot of things have been said about this. It doesn't happen very often, but it is to address those situations that are really, really unfair and grossly one-sided. All right. So, and that's that. So now I hit stop share. Now I ask the proverbial end of session question. Does anyone have any questions? I hear a ringing in my ear. I know that's not from you guys. That's from my device saying it's running out of power because I didn't adequately recharge it after I butt dialed essentially my wife 3 times. Well, actually, it was 4 o'clock in the morning or 7 o'clock over here, and I just was getting ready for yesterday's activities. Any questions? All right, then Thursday, somebody will be in the class, pass out the test, you take the test, same thing like the last time. Put the answers on the answer sheet, put the essay on a separate piece of paper, write on every other line, use the IRAC format, and then I'll see you next week when I get back. All right, if there are no questions, I'm going to hit the button that says end meeting for all, and I'll see you next week, Tuesday. Aloha.